Well, here we are, sir. A highly decorated, jarhead, Airedale, leatherneck Marine being interviewed by a wet behind the ears, paint chipping swabby in front of a room full of zoomies from the cheer force.
Are we through now?
I don't know who let this happen, but I think it's going to go well, and I'll try to not use verbose parlance because I think the Army's here too.
Would you mind repeating all of that again? I didn't hear.
But on a serious note, sir, it has been my distinct privilege to get to know you this year, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming to be honored as an Eagle this year.
Well, let me put my oar in here for a minute. I'm looking at all of you folks, the high ranks, the lower ranks, these distinguished, extinguished, whichever it was. The gentleman and the lady. I am so honored. I don't believe in my lifetime, except when I got married, am I so honored. Thank you so much for what you've given me.
Sir, in this room we have people that went to service academies to enter the military service, ROTC graduates, and then officer-trained OTS grads like we met yesterday. I'd like to take you back to 1941 and ask you to tell us how you happened to join the United States Marine Corps with a little help of your cousin.
Well, I will do this if you all promise not to tell. A little background. I was the Depression boy, and I mean a real one. I saw my first ice cream cone when I was 15. At 18, I left home because it was a nice time to do that. Went to California and joined my cousin that I'd grown up with, trying to make my own way and damn near starved to death for a while. After working with Lockheed for about 9 months, my cousin, first name Carl, gave me a call. I was living in a one room with a lady and her young daughter who had rented it to me. She let me use the phone once a day. He called, he said, Dean, why don't we just do the town? You got any money? I said, Carl, I have $7, that's all. He said, well, I've got 5, let's do it. So we wound up on Broadway, to keep it short. We decided to do the town by seeing a burlesque show. We'd never seen one before. This old boy from Texas sure hadn't. And so that we'd do a good job, we stopped, not ever having had a drink before. We bought a little bottle of Four Roses bourbon. I know that most of you don't do that, but we did. So we paid 35 cents a piece, went to the burlesque show, found a place in the loft, as dark corner as we could, and we drank the booze first. We never saw the show. At 2 o'clock in the morning, some fella came up there and said, what in the hell are you guys doing up here? The show was over at 9 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Out we went on the street. It was a bad time to be out there, and we felt like a train had run over us, but there was the doorway open and lighted, and a man was standing there in a dark suit with silver stripes on his arms. We'd never seen that before. We shouldn't really talk to him. And as he was talking, another fella came up, a little bit bigger size. He had a green uniform on, and he had red stripes on his arms. Well, we walked out of there. I was a Marine, and he was a Navy man. That was a recruiting station. So 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor, I was a private in the Marine Corps, and that's how it got started. Thank goodness.
Yes, sir. After that illustrious beginning, I love it. And then soon after that, you headed off to flight training and were soon matched with one of the most iconic airplanes in history, the F-4U. If you could tell us a little bit about your training and how you and that lovely airplane were finally matched.
Compared to some training programs that I've seen, I think we were very fortunate at that period. This was 1942. Actually, we had 9 months of flight training. Some people had shorter times than that. We had heard all about the Corsair, which was used in the latter part of Guadalcanal attack. So I was delighted when I asked to be a fighter pilot to be assigned to a fighter squadron. And that was a very interesting little jaunt, because when I walked in through the door of the flight officer, said, "Here I am. I'm Dean Caswell, a brand spanking new second lieutenant with about 125 hours of flight time." I said, "I'm reporting in for duty, sir." He said, "Well, there's an airplane right up there. Go get in it and go flying. I'm busy." No manual, no nothing. So I climbed into this long-nosed thing. I couldn't see over the front. And by the time we finished our advanced training, I had about 100 hours in the airplane. A marvelous airplane. Big, heavy, fast. And I was a young 22-year-old man, young man. Before it was over, and by the time the Korean War was over, and I flew that airplane, that type of airplane, for a while. I had 2,000 hours in that Corsair, so I liked it.
So you told me back in Austin that when aircraft selection was nearing, you weren't always assigned to the F-4U, that you were originally slated to be a dive bomber pilot?
You want that story too?
I do, yes sir.
Well, life is full of disappointments. I won't tell you her name. One week before graduation, we got a little slip of paper that answered our requests for the type of flying we wanted to do upon graduation. I had, on several occasions during flight training, indicated my strong desire to be a fighter pilot, because I had read all about G8 and these battle aces, and some of you have read that magazine too, I guess. On graduation, I had another piece of paper that says, "You're flying dive bombers." So all my work was for nothing, it seemed like. We were at Pensacola, Florida, and the graduation ceremony was at headquarters at Pensacola. And as soon as it was over, I got my uniform on with my second lieutenant bars, and I marched down and found out where they made the assignments. And sure enough, there was a 21-year-old gal, very pretty young lady. Her job was to dole out assignments, and she told me just point blank. She said, "Well, I'm just filling out the quotas, that's all. That's why you got to be a dive bomber pilot." Well, I got a date with her that night, and I told her a few things I didn't keep my promise from, but you're laughing at that. You know what happened. Anyway, I became a fighter pilot that way. How about it?
Well done, sir. So as a fighter pilot, a Marine fighter pilot, you were assigned to VMF 221, and we're going to be headed off to the Pacific shortly. So could you talk to us about VMF 221's mission? This is 1944, you're assigned to Task Force 58, and what was going on in the war at that point?
Well, I'd like to tell you that my assignment to 221 in the Corsair was to be trained in combat fighting and go to some island and sit there and be called upon to support our Marine troops in their combat and attacks on the islands. It didn't happen that way. Suddenly, after about 7 months of flight training in the Corsair, the squadron was notified you were going to be carrier-based. Well, I couldn't even spell carrier, let alone fly off of one. Suddenly we did 2 days of field carrier landing practice, went to San Diego, did that field carrier landing practicing at night, which is 50 feet off the ground. Then we were assigned to the USS Ranger, where we got 8 landings and we were qualified. And that's how they trained us to fly off of carriers. So in the Pacific, the squadron joined Task Force 58, whose primary mission was to kill all the Japanese pilots that we could, all their infrastructure, and unfortunately, a lot of people were killed too. The Corsair was the primary weapon for those Navy aircraft carriers. They carried 90 Corsair airplanes and 2 Marine squadrons and 1 Navy squadron. We fought the kamikaze. The Japanese pilots in that stage of the war, the latest strategy was to use the suicide pilot carrying a bomb to strike all the carriers that they could and any other ships they could find. And our job was to kill them all. They did a good job and we did a good job. In 9 months, the Japanese lost 4,000 pilots. We lost 2,000 pilots. It was a real tough, mean war. And then our carrier got hit by 2 kamikazes and we suffered some very serious damage. And with that, World War II was over for me. Are we ready?
Yes, sir. We're doing well. On April 28th of 1945, you were on one of these combat air patrol missions, being guided by some Fletcher-class destroyers, and it was you and 2 other Corsairs. If you could describe that mission when you found yourself head-to-head with the enemy.
All right. One of the big defenses for the task force against the kamikaze was to get warning at least 100 miles from the fleet, which would be we were at Okinawa, so that would be 100 miles north of Okinawa. And they placed their destroyers with radar equipment at that location or those locations to notify the fleet when the kamikazes were coming down. Believe it or not, their raids were as many as 400 a day. And that's pretty hard to fight against. So 4 of us were launched one day to have a combat air patrol mission over one of those radar destroyers. And they would notify us when the enemy was coming and that we were to do our best. We were ordered to 20,000 feet with the comment from the director, many, many bogeys, 20 miles. And by that time we had lost one of our pilots who had bad engine trouble and went back to the carrier. So now we're 3. We were attacked by 25 Japanese brand spanking new fighters. They were the cover for a kamikaze raid that was way down below us. My first sight was a Tony Kawasaki 61, they called it, firing head on at me. And my wingman was hollering at me, "There's a 0 on your tail." So I had bullets flying from the back and the front. And I was such a brave pilot, I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. I got the Tony in front of me and my wingman got the 0. And when that fight was over, I claimed 7 airplanes. My wingman claimed 6. We had movies to prove some of it. And the other fella got 3. The rest of them went home. The story didn't end there. It jumped to Korea. I was offloading some jet night fighters at Yokosuka. And this was in 1951. There was a Japanese man in charge of the crane offlifting our jet fighters from the carrier to the port, and then they would be towed to an airfield and flown to Korea. He was about my age, and we had a lull in our work. I was in charge of the airplanes being taken off the carrier. He walked over and talked to me for the very first time. He was about my age. And he said, "Do you fly those airplanes?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I was in the American-Japanese War." Interesting. And without a comment, he pulled out his wallet, pulled out a picture of a Tony Kawasaki 61. He was standing right beside it in pilot's uniform. He said, "That's me." And I got shot down. "You did?" He said, "Yeah, 3 Corsairs attacked us." And he told me about being in the water and all of that stuff that went with it. And I said, well, now I'm curious. I said, "When was that?" He said, "Well, we were about 100 miles north of Okinawa, and these 3 airplanes showed up." And I said, "Hold it just a minute. When was this?" He said, "It was April the 28th. April the 28th. He said, "Yes, they shot so many planes down, and I was made a prisoner." And I went to check my logbooks later. It was the man I shot down in the Tony. Same guy, same time. He confirmed that by saying it was 10 o'clock in the morning, which it surely was. I was very lucky.
Amazing, sir.
It was a mean war.
Do you think that the training that you received in flight school and then at the replenishment squadron in the F4U, did that prepare you well enough for the combat that you were going to see?
No. Combat is always different. It's a different war, different time, different place, and sometimes different people. Without making a long story of it, my next war was Korea. I did 2 tours. In the first tour, I was flying the Corsair, but flying it at night, supporting our troops, illuminating the battlefield with light. And the second one was I was flying jets and escorting B-29s up on the Yalu. In that scenario, we were fighting the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Russians, because the MiGs were up there after those 29s. I don't think anything could prepare you for that, because everything is different every time. Just had to be ready, believe in yourself, because you're always scared. Somebody asked me one time, "Are you scared?" I said, "You hell, damn right I'm scared. All the time. Vietnam wasn't any better. What else?"
Well, sir, we got an interesting question yesterday from one of the cadets over at Officer Training School. And they asked you if you ever had any survivor's guilt. And I thought your response yesterday was very enlightening. I think the group here would appreciate hearing it.
Good question. Emotionally, when you get in the business of who's going to die first, and you are scared, but you have a duty to perform, and that's what you're trained for. I had no remorse about the young pilot that was trying to kill me, because I think in most cases I was better than he was, and I felt that way, and if I managed to shoot him down, it wasn't a hooray I won, because there was always another one around to keep you busy. Unfortunately in war, and I'll say this, women and children, families who are not engaged in the war are involved in it whether they like it or not, and somebody up there is trying to kill them. When we raided Honshu, Kyushu, the islands of Japan, you could not help but kill a bunch of civilians. What's even worse, when you come back, you have film showing what you shot, who you shot, and how you did it, and you reviewed your films for official purposes. I have never forgotten that. I still dream about it today, and I'm 94 years old. It's just tough business. And this is where the training that I see you giving your people here, they become dedicated to their job, the protection of the United States, regardless of politics. And you cannot have remorse bothering what you do, but you still know it's there and it stays with you a long time. No fun at all. Yes, sir?
Sir, and to illustrate how dangerous